The day my parents sat me down and told me they were getting divorced, my whole world turned upside down. I was only 12, and I thought divorces were for couples who fought all the time. You know, the ones who screamed about money and slammed doors. But my parents were always so polite to each other. Sure, we hadn't been on a family outing in a while, but I figured they were just busy. "Candy," my mom said, her voice weirdly calm. "Your father and I have something to tell you." I looked at them, sitting there on the couch, a careful distance between them. Dad cleared his throat. "We've decided to get divorced," he said, like he was announcing we were having pizza for dinner. I blinked, waiting for the punchline. But it never came. "What?" I finally managed to squeak out. "But why?" Mom reached out and patted my hand. "Sometimes, people grow apart, sweetie. Your father and we've found other people we want to be with." Dad nodded. "I'll be moving out soon. You'll live with your mother, but you'll stay with me sometimes too." I sat there, trying to process this bombshell. My parents were leaving each other for other people? And I was supposed to just, what? Go along with it? "Who are these other people?" I asked, my voice sounding small and far away. Mom smiled, and I noticed for the first time how it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You'll meet them soon. My friend has 2 daughters about your age. Won't that be nice?" Nice? My parents were blowing up our family, and I was supposed to think it was nice? "And my partner has a son," Dad added, like he was sweetening the deal. I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over the coffee table. "I don't want new sisters or brothers. I want us to stay together." I ran to my room and slammed the door, throwing myself on the bed. I could hear them talking in low voices downstairs, probably figuring out how to rearrange my life some more. I thought about the last few months, how Mom and Dad had taken me out separately. I'd go to the movies with Dad one weekend, then to a cafe with Mom the next. I thought it was cool, getting one-on-one time with each of them. Now I realized it was just the beginning of the end. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Dad packed his bags and moved out, heading off to live with his new wife. Apparently, they'd already gotten married in some quickie ceremony. She had a son, just like Dad had said. Meanwhile, Mom's new husband moved in with us. He brought his twin daughters, who were a year younger than me. At first, I was kind of excited. I'd always wanted a sister to share secrets with, to stay up late talking about boys and life and all that stuff. The day they moved in, I tried to be friendly. I smiled at the girls and said, "Hey, I'm Candy. Want me to show you around?" The taller one, I think her name was Brittany, looked me up and down like I was something stuck to her shoe. "No thanks," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "We don't need your help." Her sister nodded in agreement. "Yeah, and just so we're clear, we're not your sisters. You're just extra." Extra. The word hit me like a slap in the face. I stood there, mouth open, as they brushed past me, giggling to themselves. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the sounds of my new family settling in. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The next day, things got worse. I came home from school to find the twins wearing my clothes. "Hey," I said, shocked. "Those are mine." Brittany rolled her eyes. "Mom said we could borrow them." "Don't be so selfish." I looked to Mom for backup, but she just smiled. "Now, Candy, sharing is caring. The girls just want to feel welcome." Welcome? They were wearing my favorite shirt. I stomped up to my room, fighting back tears. As the days passed, it became clear that I was no longer the center of Mom's world. She doted on the twins, buying them new clothes and toys. My stuff started disappearing, given away to my new sisters without my permission. One day, I overheard Mom talking to her new husband. "The girls need new phones," she was saying. "We could use the money we set aside for Candy's birthday." My birthday. She was going to skip my birthday for them. When the day came, Mom barely remembered. "Oh, honey," she said distractedly when I reminded her. "I'm so sorry, but the girls have a big sports event today." We'll celebrate another time, okay? But we never did. I thought things might be better at Dad's place, where I stayed every other weekend. But I was wrong about that too. Dad's new wife was pregnant, and she had no time for me. And her son? He was a nightmare. One night, I woke up to a tickling sensation on my face. I opened my eyes and saw a huge spider sitting on my nose. I screamed, flailing around in panic. The whole house came running. As the lights flicked on, I saw it wasn't a real spider, but a plastic toy. And there was Dad's stepson, grinning in the doorway. "What's going on?" Dad's wife demanded, her pregnant belly leading the way as she waddled into the room. "Candy woke us all up with her screaming," the boy said innocently. "Over a toy." "You little," I started, but Dad's wife cut me off. "Honestly, Candy, what is wrong with you? Are you some kind of hysterical lunatic?" I turned to Dad, expecting him to defend me. But he just stood there, looking uncomfortable. "He put it there," I insisted. "He knows I'm afraid of spiders." "Don't be ridiculous," his wife snapped. "Stop lying and go to sleep. I don't want to see you for the rest of the night." I looked at Dad again, silently begging him to say something, anything. But he just sighed and said, "I'll take you home in the morning, Candy." As they all filed out, leaving me alone in the dark, I realized something. I didn't have a home anymore. I was alone. Life at Mom's house didn't get any better. The twins, emboldened by Mom's constant praise and attention, became downright cruel. One afternoon, I came home to find my favorite mug shattered on the kitchen floor. The twins were standing there, looking innocent as angels. "Oh, Candy," Brittany said, her voice syrupy sweet. "We're so sorry. We were just trying to make you some tea, and it slipped." I knew it was a lie. They'd never done anything nice for me, let alone make me tea. But before I could say anything, Mom and my stepdad walked in. "What's going on here?" Mom asked, eyeing the mess on the floor. "Candy broke her mug," the other twin piped up. "She got angry and smashed it." My stepdad's face darkened. Without a word, he grabbed my arm and led me to the small storage room at the end of the hall. It was dark and musty, filled with old boxes and forgotten junk. "You'll stay in here until you learn to control your temper," he said, pushing me inside. "But I didn't do anything." I cried, but he just shut the door, leaving me in darkness. I heard giggling outside the door. It was the twins. "Hey, Candy," one of them called through the wood. "Did you know this room is full of spiders? Big, hairy ones that come out in the dark." I huddled in the corner, trying not to panic. I knew they were lying, but the darkness seemed to crawl around me. Every little sound made me jump. Hours passed. Nobody came to let me out, not even Mom. When the door finally opened, it was morning. Mom stood there, looking tired. "I hope you've learned your lesson," she said. "Now get ready for school." I tried to tell her what really happened, but she just waved me off. That was when I realized Mom would always believe them over me. I started spending more and more time at my Aunt Sarah's house. She was Dad's sister, and she lived with her husband, Uncle Tom. They didn't have kids of their own, so they were always happy to see me. At first, I'd just visit for a few hours after school. But those hours turned into days, and soon I was spending weeks at a time with them. One day, after I'd been at Aunt Sarah's for almost a month, my teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, showed up at Mom's house for a home visit. I wasn't there, of course, but I heard about it later from a neighbor kid who saw the whole thing. Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on the door, looking concerned. When Mom answered, the teacher asked to see me. "Oh, Candy's with her father this week," Mom said dismissively. Mrs. Rodriguez frowned. "That's odd. I just called Mr. Johnson, and he said Candy was living with you." Mom's face went pale. "What? But, I thought." Mrs. Rodriguez was furious. She contacted Child Protective Services, and before I knew it, we were all headed to court. I sat in the courtroom, now 14 years old, watching as my parents argued over who should take care of me. But it wasn't the kind of argument I'd expected. You take her, Dad shouted at Mom. I have a small child. I don't have time for a teenager. Mom scoffed. Are you kidding? I have a life now. I can't deal with Candy's drama. I sat there, feeling smaller and smaller as they tossed me back and forth like a hot potato. Neither of them wanted me. But then, Aunt Sarah stood up. Your Honor, she said, her voice clear and strong. If I may, Tom and I would like to take custody of Candy. The courtroom went silent. I looked at Aunt Sarah in shock. She smiled at me, then turned back to the judge. She handed some papers to the judge. These documents show our financial stability. I'm a teacher, and Tom's a doctor. We can provide for Candy in every way. The judge looked over the papers, then looked at me. Candy, he said gently. You're old enough to have a say in this. Who do you want to live with? I didn't hesitate. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom, I said, my voice shaking but certain. I saw the relief on my parents' faces. They didn't even try to hide it. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new life. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom weren't just taking care of me, they were parenting me. They asked about my day, helped me with my homework, and actually listened when I talked. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Uncle Tom asked, So, Candy, what should we call each other now? We're officially your guardians. I thought for a moment. These people had shown me more love in a few weeks than my own parents had in years. Could I call you Mom and Dad? I asked hesitantly. Aunt Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Oh, sweetie, we'd be honored. From that day on, they were Mom and Dad to me. My birth parents became distant memories, people I thought about less and less as time went on. My new life wasn't just about Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom, though. I also got to know Uncle Tom's mother, my new grandmother. She lived nearby and quickly became one of my favorite people in the world. Grandma was a retired doctor, and she had this way of making everything interesting. We'd spend hours in her garden, planting vegetables and flowers while she told me stories about her days in the hospital. And I realized I also want to become a doctor. With Grandma's help and the unwavering support of my new parents, I threw myself into my studies. Before I knew it, it was time for high school graduation. As I stood in my cap and gown, scanning the audience, I saw the faces of the people who truly mattered, Mom, Dad, and Grandma, all beaming with pride. My birth parents weren't there. They hadn't even sent a card. I applied to medical college and, to my delight, got accepted on a full scholarship. Life was good. I had a loving family, a clear goal, and a bright future ahead of me. 3 years flew by in a whirlwind of lectures, late-night study sessions, and clinical rotations. Every time I put on my white coat, I felt a surge of pride, knowing I was living the dream Grandma had helped nurture. That's why, when Mom, Aunt Sarah, called me that rainy Tuesday afternoon, I knew something was terribly wrong before she even spoke. Candy, honey, she said, her voice cracking. It's Grandma. She's gone. The world stopped spinning. Grandma? Gone? It couldn't be. We had plans to review my latest paper this weekend. She was supposed to be at my graduation in a year. The next few days passed in a blur of tears and hushed conversations. As we gathered for the funeral, I stood between Mom and Dad, Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom, feeling like a little girl again, lost and scared. But then came the reading of the will. To my beloved granddaughter, Candy, the lawyer read, I leave my entire estate, including my house and all my savings, amounting of $1,980,000. I gasped, looking around the room in shock. This had to be a mistake. But Mom and Dad were nodding, small smiles on their tear-stained faces. Grandma talked to us about this, Dad explained later. She wanted to make sure you had a solid foundation for your future. We agreed it was the right thing to do. As the dust settled and I tried to come to terms with my newfound wealth, life threw me another curveball. My phone started ringing with unfamiliar numbers. When I finally answered one, I nearly dropped the phone in shock. Candy? Hi, it's your mother. I hadn't heard her voice in years. Before I could respond, she rushed on, I've been thinking about you so much lately. How are you? Where are you studying? We should catch up. Over the next few days, similar calls came in from my birth father. Suddenly, they were both intensely interested in my life, asking to meet, talking about how much they missed me. Confused and a little suspicious, I mentioned it to Mom and Dad over dinner one night. To my surprise, they burst out laughing. "Oh, Candy," Mom said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "I hate to say it, but I think they might have caught wind of your inheritance." Part of me wanted to ignore them, to pretend I'd never got those calls. But another part, a part one thought I'd long since buried, was curious. What would it be like to see them again? To show them the woman I'd become without their help? Maybe I should meet them, I said slowly. Just to see what they want. Mom and Dad exchanged a look. "If that's what you want to do, we'll support you," Mom said. "But be careful, sweetie. People can surprise you, and not always in a good way." The next day, I found myself standing on the familiar porch of my childhood home. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The door swung open, and there she was, my birth mother. For a moment, we just stared at each other. "Candy," she breathed, her eyes welling up with tears. "Oh, my baby girl." She pulled me into a hug that felt stiff and awkward. Over her shoulder, I could see my stepfather and the twins hovering in the background, plastered on smiles on their faces. Come in," my mother urged, ushering me inside. Dinner was a strange affair. The twins were sickeningly sweet, a far cry from the cruel girls I remembered. "We're so glad you're here, Candy," one of them simpered, Brittany, I think. "We've missed you so much." I caught the flash of irritation in her eyes that belied her words, but I just smiled and nodded. As we ate, the conversation took a turn. My mother glanced around the dining room, sighing dramatically. "This old house," she said, shaking her head. "It's seen better days, hasn't it? The roof needs replacing, and don't even get me started on the plumbing." I took a sip of water, saying nothing. My stepfather chimed in. "And of course, with the girls heading to college soon, well, you know how expensive that can be." I pretended to be very interested in my mashed potatoes. "It's such a shame," my mother continued, her voice dripping with fake concern. "The girls are so bright, but with our financial situation." She trailed off, looking at me expectantly. I met her gaze evenly, but said nothing. The silence stretched on, growing more uncomfortable by the second. Finally, I decided to change the subject. "So," I said brightly, "I've been wondering. What grades did I graduate high school with?" "I can't quite remember." The color drained from my mother's face. She opened and closed her mouth a few times, looking like a fish out of water. "Well, it was so long ago." Well, my version was completely confirmed. She didn't know anything about my life, my achievements, my struggles. All she knew was that I had money now. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I think I know why you invited me here," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "It's about my inheritance, isn't it?" The room went silent. My stepfather's face turned red, and the twins suddenly found their plates very interesting. "How can you say that?" my mother gasped, but her eyes gave her away. There was no warmth there, no motherly love. Just calculation and disappointment. "Now, Candy," my stepfather started, but I cut him off. "No. I'm done here. Don't contact me again." And with that, I walked out into the cool night air, leaving behind the echoes of their angry shouts and my own past. I didn't need their approval or their love. I had a real family waiting for me at home. Just a few days later, I found myself standing at my father's front door. The door swung open, revealing my stepmother. Her face contorted into what I assumed was meant to be a welcoming smile, but looked more like she'd just bitten into a lemon. I forced a smile back and stepped inside. As we moved into the living room, I noticed a teenage boy lounging on the couch. He looked up as we entered, and I recognized him instantly, the spider thrower. He'd grown up quite a bit, and to my surprise, he gave me a genuinely friendly smile. "Hey, Candy," he said, standing up. "Long time no see. I'm Jake, in case you forgot." Before I could respond, a whirlwind of pigtails and glitter burst into the room. A little girl, no more than 8, skidded to a stop in front of me, her eyes wide. "Who are you?" she demanded. My father, looking older and more tired, cleared his throat. "Lily, this is your sister, Candy." We settled into an awkward conversation, my stepmother peppering me with questions about my life that I answered as vaguely as possible. Jake, surprisingly, seemed genuinely interested, asking about my medical studies with what appeared to be real curiosity. As the evening wore on, I could feel the conversation steering towards the real reason for this reunion. My father kept glancing at my stepmother, who would nod slightly, urging him on. Finally, he cleared his throat. "So, Candy," he began, his voice overly casual. "We heard about your windfall." I tensed, waiting for what was coming next. "You know, Lily here is quite the little genius," he continued. "We've been thinking of sending her to this prestigious private school, but, well, it's not cheap." I said nothing, my face carefully blank. My stepmother jumped in. "What your father is trying to say, Candy, is that we could use some help. For Lily's future, you understand." I took a deep breath, feeling my patience wearing thin. "Why now?" I asked, looking directly at my father. "Why are you only remembering me now that I have money?" The room went deadly silent. Even Lily, who had been playing with her dolls, seemed to sense the tension. My father started to stammer out an excuse, but my stepmother's face suddenly twisted with anger. "Now you listen here," she hissed, all pretense of kindness gone. "You're obligated to help your family. If you don't, we'll take you to court. We'll demand our share of that money. You owe us." I couldn't help it, I laughed. "Actually," I said, standing up, "according to the law, you're not my family at all. You abandoned me, remember? Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom are my legal parents now." As I walked out the door, I heard my stepmother's shrill voice and my father's angry shouts, but I didn't look back. I got into my car and drove away, feeling a mix of emotions, sadness, anger, but mostly relief. In the days following my visits to my birth parents, my phone buzzed incessantly. Calls, texts, and voicemails poured in from both of them, each more desperate than the last. "Candy, please," my mother's voice pleaded in one message. "We're about to lose the house. We'll be on the streets. Don't you care?" My father's approaches ranged from guilt-tripping to outright demands. "After everything we've done for you," one text read, "this is how you repay us?" I let them all go unanswered. I focused instead on my studies, throwing myself into my final year of college with renewed determination. One evening, as I was poring over a particularly complex cardiology textbook, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. Hesitantly, I answered. "Hello? Candy? It's Jake. You know, your, stepbrother, I guess? Look, I know this is weird, but I wanted to apologize. For the spider thing, years ago. It was a really crappy thing to do." I found myself smiling despite everything. "Jake, that was ages ago. Water under the bridge." "No, really," he insisted. "I've felt bad about it for years. I wanted to say sorry sooner, but you never came back after that. And I swear, this isn't about the money or anything. I guess I wanted you to know I'm not that stupid kid anymore." His sincerity was touching. "I appreciate that, Jake, really." We ended up talking for over an hour. Jake was in his first year of college, studying engineering. He was funny and self-deprecating, nothing like the bratty kid I remembered. By the end of the call, we'd agreed to meet up for coffee the next week. As the months passed, Jake and I developed a genuine friendship. It was strange, finding a connection with someone from my past life, but it felt good. We met regularly for coffee or study sessions, and he became a supportive presence in my life. Meanwhile, my life was moving forward at a dizzying pace. The long nights and grueling exams were worth it when I finally stood on stage, accepting my college diploma. As I looked out into the audience, I saw Mom, Dad, and Jake cheering wildly. My heart swelled with joy and gratitude. As for my birth parents, their messages eventually tapered off. I heard through Jake that they were struggling financially, but I kept my distance. It wasn't out of spite or anger anymore, just a recognition that we were on different paths. One day, as Jake and I were grabbing coffee, he mentioned his little sister, my half-sister, Lily. "She's really smart," he said. "Always reading, asking questions about everything. But my dad and stepmom, they're not exactly encouraging it." I thought about the bright-eyed little girl I'd met briefly. "Maybe," I said slowly, "I could help with her education. Set up a college fund or something. Not for them, but for her." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the abandonment, the unexpected inheritance, it had all led me to this moment. I was Dr. Candy Johnson now, with a bright future in medicine ahead of me. I had a family who loved me, a true friend in Jake, and the means to make a difference in a young girl's life.